Assalamu alaikum students, this is your teacher Anam Kadri, and today we are going to learn about the different types of iterative system statements, whereas learn about specifically for loops in iterative statements. Before beginning, let me explain you what do I mean by the term iterative statement. An iterative statement is one that repeats itself over and over again, so you can regard it as a loop. It is used to repeat a set of instructions multiple times without rewriting the same code again and again. By now, you must have understood the real significance behind the iterative statement. But let me tell you, there is not just one significance of writing in iterative statements, there are multiple. The first one being that this reduces the amount of code written. Imagine that you have to write down the code welcome 10 times. Instead of writing the same code with the comment welcome 10 times, you just integrate it into the iterative statement so that it is written once, whereas it runs multiple times. So instead of writing 10 statements, you reduce the code to only one statement. Secondly, it makes the program easier to read and maintain. Since with one statement and with the iterative statement, it will form a perfect structure which will be easier to read. And if any changes are needed in that statement, only one statement would be changed accordingly. Thirdly, it allows a program to process large amounts of data efficiently. Means obviously when you are integrating it in the iterative statement, it's going to run 10 times efficiently without any problem. And fourthly, it enables repetition until a condition is met. Now this condition can be any condition. It can be the number of counts, or it can be any condition on the basis of which it is going to run. This will depend on the type of loop that will be used. Let's see how many different types of iterative statements can we use. The first one being the for loops. These are used when the number of repetitions are known. We will be dealing with the syntax of the for loops in detail later. The second type of loop is the while loop. This is used when the repetition continues while a condition remains true. So here the number of counts are not specified. Instead, the termination of this loop will depend upon a condition. The third one being the repeat until loop, which is used when the loop must execute at least once. This is mostly used in validation of the data, and we reserve it basically for the data validation. Coming back to the syntax of for loops. The general form of the for loop will include the keyword for, since this is a keyword, so this is written in capital letter, the name of the variable that needs to be incremented every time to run the loop. So I have used the name of the variable as counter here. This name of the variable can change according to the requirement as well. Followed by the arrow key, and after the arrow key the start value, whatever the start value, wherever you want to start your loop, you are going to put in that integer value here, followed by the keyword to, and then where you want to, at which value you want to end your for loop. Normally the first statement of the for loop finishes at the end value, but there are a few conditions in which you need to increment the variable two places forward or backward. So under such conditions, we use the keyword step, and then whatever value you want to increment, that value is added here. If you want to move one place forward, you add +1 here in place of increment, because here the integer value is used. If you want to go back one place, it will be step -1. If you want to move 2 places forward, then it will be step plus 2. After that, whatever statements you want to iterate multiple times, those are enclosed within the for structure, followed by the keyword next, and after the next, the name of the variable which you have been incrementing from the start value to the end value. You must have noticed that the statements are written with slight indentation in between for and the next statement. So as many statements as there are, they can be multiple statements as well, they can be a single statement as well. They are all slightly indented, thereby showing that they are all a part of the for loop. So you can take this statement as the beginning of the for loop starts with the for keyword and it ends up with the next statement. For example, if you have to count up, means you have to increment the variable, you can use for number, which is the name of the variable here that we need to increment, arrow 1 to 10, step 1, output number, and then next number. So what it will do is, it is going to start with number is equals to 1. Since we have to output this number, so it will output the number 1. Move on to the next statement where the number 1 is incremented. Now by step 1, it is already defined that it will be incremented only by one step. So it's going to be now 2. It will go back to the first statement and we'll see, is 2 a part of the number between 1 and 10? Yes, it is. It is going to output the number 2. Move on to the third statement. This time the number will be incremented to 3. It will go back again to the first statement, see if it's still within 1 and 10, and in this way it is going to output until the number 10 is output. After number 10 is output, it will move to the next statement where the number will be 11. But since on going back this time 11 is not a part of this loop, so it is going to come out of this loop. Another example is of count down. Here the numbers will be decremented. So in the counter, for counter, after the arrow, we are going to write down the maximum number from where it is going to be decremented to the minimum number. And notice that here we have used step -1, thereby showing that it is going to be decremented by one step every time, while the rest of the statements are almost the same as the previous one, except with the change of the variable. So this is going to output the number 10 first, and on the next counter it will see that what it has to do, it has to step down by one step. So it will be decremented to 9. And we'll move to the first line, that is the for counter statement, in which it will see whether 9 falls within the range of 10 to 1. If yes, then it is going to output 9 and move on to the next statement where it will be further decremented. And in this way, this will continue until the number 1 is output, after which further decrementation would enable it to come out of the range specified in counter, and hence it will come out of the for loop. Let's take another example, the example that we used in the beginning of writing down the statement welcome 5 times. So instead of writing it down 5 times, we have all squeezed it down to only 3 statements, of which the first one is for count 1 to 5, output welcome, and then next count. Now notice that we have not included the step statement here. As I told you before, that step statement is not a compulsion. It is mostly used in places where you need to increment it by more than one step, or by decrementing the loop. So if the step statement is not included in your for loop, by default it will take it as incrementing it by one step. Where are for loops used? I told you earlier as well that for loops are used when the programmer already knows how many times a task must be repeated. Let's discuss now a few examples which will make this concept clearer to you. For example, you already know that you have to display the numbers from 1 to 100. You will use for loop. When you have to calculate the total of 30 test scores, means you already know the count, that how many times you have to calculate the test scores. So you're going to use for loop again. In processing 50 students record, you know that how many students you need to for the re, how many student records you need for the processing, that is 50, so you have to repeat the processing 50 times, so you use the for loop. And last but not the least, if you have to print multiplication tables, multiplication tables are either used up till multiplied by 10 or multiplied by 12, totally up to you. But you know that you have to start multiplying it from 1 and move on to 10 or move on to 12. So when you know this in particular, you use for loop because you know the starting value and the ending value. When should for loops be preferred? In the situations where you know the number of repetitions, in the situations where you have to process the specific number of records, in the situations when you have to display specific numbers or a specific range of numbers. But when you don't know how many times you're going to run it, in fact, it will repeat only if a condition is stated, then this is where you don't use a for loop. Instead, you use a repeat until loop, especially when it requires validation of the data and where the repeating requires the availability of any stocks. That means again you don't know the count for sure, so you will not use for loop here, but instead will use while loop. We will discuss the use of repeat until loop and while loop in detail in our next lectures. Let's see which type of questions have been appearing in the past papers that require the use of for loops. Question number 1. Write a pseudocode to input 10 numbers and output their total. Now you have to input 10 numbers and output their total. That means you know the number of numbers or the count of the numbers. So here you are going to use for loop. Total will always be initialized to 0 since you have to input the numbers from 1 to 10. So you're going to use for count 1 to 10. You have to take the input from the user, so you use the statement input number. Since the total is generated, so the total statement is going to be total plus number. This statement will be dealt with and explained very clearly in our next lecture, and then the next count. So here, since you have to take 10 numbers, so the count value is taken from 1 to 10, and every time the number is taken is input by the user, and that number is added to the total to generate the total of the 10 numbers. Once the entire total is calculated, that means all 10 numbers are taken and they are added to the total, then you come out of the for loop, and that is when you are going to output the total. Question number 2 involves taking the input 20 numbers as input and finding out the largest among all those numbers. So again, we know that we have to take 20 numbers as input, so we are going to use for loop. Starting off with, the largest is taken as a variable which is initially assigned the value 0, which is the least value that you can expect, least positive value that you can expect. Then for count 1 to 20 input number, this will enable the loop to be activated and will help taking in 20 numbers as the input. Every time they are input, they are compared with the largest value. If the number that is input is greater than the number that is present in the variable largest, then the largest is replaced by the number that is taken as the input. This will involve the use of the if statement within the for loop. So you can integrate multiple if statements within the for loop as well this way. And then the next count which will increment the count to the next number, so that next number will be taken as input. Notice that from the input statement to the if statement and the if structure, everything is indented within the for loop, thereby stating that these are all a part of the for loop and they will be executed when the numbers are taken as input during the runtime when the for loop is running. Now once the entire for loop is completed, we will know for sure that the largest value now present in the variable will be the largest value that is among all the numbers that are taken input within the for loop. And once this is specified and we have come out of the for loop, then only we output the largest variable or the largest value taken input by the user. While using the for loops, students tend to make a few mistakes, so you have to be careful regarding some of the common mistakes that students does. The first one is that they forget to initialize the value of total and counter before the loop. So it is always advisable to that if you are counting or totaling, the variables of total and count should always be initialized by 0. And then obviously within the for loop, if you are using any variable, it is already initialized by the initial value, so you don't need to initialize that variable. Secondly, always use meaningful variable names. For example, if you have to run the loop for 30 students in a class, instead of using the variable name counter, you are going to use the variable name student, thereby showing that this will reflect the number of students within the class. Remember to write next count. No, normally students forget, they write the for statement in the beginning, but they forget to write down the next statement in the end. And last but not the least, use for loops whenever the question specifies. Like if you have to input 20 values, process 50 records, repeat for all students, display numbers, all of these have a certain range or the number specified in it. Note that in the third statement it said repeat for all students. So if you know the count of students within a school or within a class for which you have to repeat it, then you are going to use for loops there. But if there is a condition on the basis of which the number of students, the data of the students need to be repeated, then obviously for that condition you cannot use the for loop. Instead you will use the while loop. I hope you have understood the topic of for loop. We will cover the total and the count statements in our next lecture. Stay tuned. Take care. Allah Hafiz.